Well, but besides Trump versus Kamala Harris, another place where this important battle between democracy and fascism is going on is the Supreme Court, the way it is right now. This is extraordinary what's happened on the court. And it's not at all clear what to do about it. Now, you probably know that but the big news yesterday was that President Biden released and presented his program for three changes. And let's see if this old man can remember all three at once. Well, one thing is to have term limits of 18 years for the court. I don't have a clear idea yet. I'm a little confused about how that works when you start with this court. How does that work? But in any event, it's laid out. But that requires a constitutional amendment. Let's see, what's the second one? I don't want to get the last to undoing the immunity decision. Anyway, the other thing, a mandatory code of ethics that's enforceable, so that we aren't in this bizarre situation where the people who get to declare what the rules are and what they mean are themselves the only people in the whole governmental structure who are not required to follow any rules themselves. And that is a sign of something. But the problem goes a whole lot deeper than what that signifies. The problem is that the Supreme Court in our system gets the last word. And since we are a nation of laws, the whole concept is that the rule of law includes that you've got a court that will look at the Constitution and look at the statutes, whatever you want to call the laws that get passed, and interpret them in a good faith way to come to decisions about all the various conflicts that arise in any society. What happens when there isn't good faith? That's a whole different thing. And the problem with this court is they are not operating in that rule of law framework. They have left that framework because what they are is an extension of a political force that put them on the bench. And that is basically, if you look at it sort of comprehensively, fascistic in nature. So instead of being what a court's supposed to be, deciding what justice requires given the Constitution and the law, instead of that, you've got a partisan group. And worse even than that, they are partisans for the worst political force that's ever controlled a major American political party in American history. There have been some ugly things in American history that were represented in major parties, but this thing is different from even the political force in the 19th century that represented the interests of the slave power, or in the late 19th century and early 20th century that represented the force of corporate greed. We've had destructive things going on, but it was almost always, I think it was always, from my knowledge, until now, you always had a court that in some way was acting in good faith. Now, when the clock strikes 13, and they say, it calls into question not only the last bong, but all 12 of those that went before. And this decision can be considered a 13th bell. It struck, when the clock struck 13 then, it really revealed what I've been, and a lot of people have been saying for a long time about this court, that in a sense it is a captured court. Senator Whitehouse from Rhode Island on the Judiciary Committee has done such a good job of describing how it is captured. But what's been missing is talking about this in terms of what it really means, which is that as things now stand, if we function within the normal American framework, even though something abnormal has taken over the Supreme Court and is able to decide the outcome of all of our conflicts, what are we supposed to do? It's a dilemma. I mean, basically, do we give fascism the power? Do we recognize its authority to decide all of our conflicts? Use Chevron to get rid of the administrative state that's been doing a decent job of holding corporate America in some kind of check so that their pursuit of profit doesn't destroy the social fabric and doesn't destroy the natural environment. Chevron got overturned. And then there's Dobbs, the theocrat's decision. We see that this fascist force has been putting out bad law for years now. We didn't even have to get to six Republican appointees to have bad law. The way they opened the floodgates with Citizens United so that the money power could grab hold of political power through their wealth. The gutting of the Voting Rights Act on the pretense that they could be confident that this wouldn't be opening the door again to Jim Crow type ways of disenfranchising people. Bad faith. But we now see with the immunity decision in particular, I mean, that is just so off the charts. Nobody even people like Andrew Weissman, who have been rather critical of the Supreme Court for all the delay, and was very upset that they basically made the decision that the American people wouldn't get to see Trump's most serious crimes by delaying things the way they did so needlessly. He was already upset about that. But even he never imagined that they would hand down a decision like this immunity decision. The idea that the Constitution says that the most powerful in the country should be empowered to do practically anything, commit crimes, without being exposed to legal consequences, not being able to be held accountable by the rule of law. He can commit crimes. He is above the law. And you'd have to think that a justice was stupid as hell to say things like parroting one of Trump's arguments that in the immunity case, that without this immunity, every president would be sort of, and then they characterize, oh, what a terrible thing it would be if presidents didn't enjoy the kind of immunity they were claiming. While we've got what, 45, 46, 40 presidencies. Nobody except Trump has this been relevant to. They all recognize that they took an oath, that they're not allowed to commit crimes, that there are limits to what a president is allowed to do. The Constitution requires that the whole principle behind the Constitution of a nation of laws, not of men, is the Constitution requires us to overturn that and give the president the right to do whatever. Nobody, the idea that every president would cower when no president ever had to worry about it shows just how stupid you'd have to be to believe what they're laying down. They're not stupid. They are partisans of a fascist political force. And as the years go along, what are we going to do about that? Now, Biden would undo that immunity decision. I think that takes a constitutional law too. I think you'd have to amend the Constitution to undo that immunity decision. We've done that 27 times in 2.5 centuries, less than 2.5, but it is really hard. And we still haven't passed the Equal Rights Amendment. We can use it as an issue. But in the meanwhile, what do we do about the fact that the last word, if we follow the American system, is going to be handed down on abortion, on guns, on voting rights, on money in politics, the whole smear, on the ability to combat climate change, probably. That the force of fascism, that the plutocracy, that the theocracy, that all this ugly stuff that has come together in the Trump party is going to be able to lay down, this is how it's going to be, defining America for the future. Are we just going to let that happen for the next generation? That's basically what we're looking for. What they did in the last 2 sessions has remade America in the direction of fascism along several dimensions. Do we continue to let that go? I mean, that's what Biden's gone far enough to institute some important signals to America at the very least, but they are not going to change the power equation. Oh, within a generation, I would say. Maybe the judicial ethics you could get past, but that's really not the problem. I mean, what Thomas has done, what Alito has done, is corrupt and ugly and hypocritical and arrogant. And it shows how dark is the force that put them there. These are not the kind of people you want sitting on the Supreme Court. There's ugliness to be shown in both those men. And it is bonkers that every other federal official, including every other federal judge, is operating under a mandatory code of ethics that's enforceable. That only the people who get the last word on what the rules are can't be compelled to follow any rules. So you get people like Thomas and Alito not recusing themselves from decisions involving things that their wives were up to in very inappropriate ways. Definitely got to recuse in that situation. And there's even a law, but it doesn't get enforced. Okay. And it's not okay that they've had, like in Thomas's case, a few $1 million worth of, basically payoffs. His greed to live the highest of high lives, which is documented to be sort of a major motivation of his. I mean, I live on a fraction of a Supreme Court justice's salary. And I'm pretty happy with what I got, but not Thomas. He came out of there with some kind of not too good of a thing about how he has to be immersed in luxury, and so he takes these junkets with on the planes and to the resorts owned by these billionaires, and gets an RV and all that stuff. That's bad. Well, but even if there were enforceable rules, that wouldn't touch the real problem that we have, which is that right now there is a majority on this Supreme Court. I mean, even Justice Roberts signed on to that immunity decision. I don't get that guy. Wasn't there something honorable someplace in that guy? How could he sign on? Did he just not want to be left out to dry? He must surely know that he's destroying the court, that we were told for years that he wanted his legacy to have been to strengthen the court. And here we've got a Supreme Court where the favorability percentage is down in the 30s. I think we need to move on that fact, that there's a big majority of people that are not happy with this court. And I don't know what we should do, but I know that what Biden has proposed can do the good of raising some questions. But where the rubber hits the road is, are we going to continue to respect the power and authority of a Supreme Court that is now simply doing the bidding of the force of fascism that we need to defeat? How do we go about defeating the force of fascism on the Supreme Court? I can't feel that we defeat them by continuing to respect their authority. I think that this is a battle for public opinion, and that we need to dramatize that the real problem with this court is they don't do their job as the Supreme Court. They do bad law because they're not even trying to do the law. And we need a court that will hand down justice, which is what the whole thing was supposed to be about. And to get the public opinion that's unhappy with this court behind some course of action that doesn't just leave power in the hands of the fascists. We can't let them have the last word from now until we can get constitutional amendments passed. No, we need to fight that battle in some way. It's an awkward situation where you want to represent the victory of the rule of law. But in this case, the victory of the rule of law means essentially taking power away from the Supreme Court that the rule of law previously gave to it. It undermines the constitutional system because it defies the authority that the constitutional system gives to this body. The problem is that over the course of the last 40 years, this body got turned into something unworthy of our respect, something that is the enemy of justice, something that is part of a force that is consistently doing stuff that makes the human world worse. Gutting the Voting Rights Act makes the human world worse. giving more power to the plutocracy through campaign funding stuff that this court did in Citizens United. That's making the human world worse. You can map all these things and you can say that at every stage, Chevron strips this carefully developed system by which we as a society have been trying to harness the power of the market system while controlling some of its destructive inclinations. An important piece of work that every advanced economy has worked to do. They just overturn that. That is not good for the human world. Now, my definition of evil is a coherent force that consistently works to make the human world worse. And if you look at my website, betterhumanstory.org, you can see that as a social scientist, I lay out a picture of a coherent force that really does warrant being considered a force, and that operates in such a consistent way that if it creates brokenness, and then brokenness begets more brokenness, and this pattern of brokenness moves through the human world. You can see this thing. And you can see right now that a coherent force that consistently works to make the human world more broken fairly reasonably describes the role that this Supreme Court has been playing. When they sided in the immunity case with the criminal against the rule of law, Jack Smith had argued, hey, court, this is like Nixon in 74. You got to be quick and get this done and let us get moving on because of the enormous public interest in letting the American people see what this guy did before they have to go vote. So obviously that was true. That's what the special counsel argued in the Nixon case. The Supreme Court handled it really fast, came back with virtually a unanimous decision against Nixon, speeding the process, leading rather quickly to a resolution where the presidency spit out Richard Nixon. Clearly the same thing applied there, but this Supreme Court sided grotesquely. No need to entertain his appeal. It had been dealt with powerfully and cogently by Judge Chutkan and then by the appeals court. It was already done. And the court could have taken it like in Nixon and dealt with it. And then we would have had a trial starting in January. And the American people would have been able to see that Donald Trump had committed some of the worst crimes, probably the worst crimes in the history of our civilization, the most serious crimes. No need for any delay, but they give him half a year. Too long for there to be any real chance, particularly when you add the immunity decision, that the American people will know anything through a judicial process, a trial, about what Trump did the last time he was president, trying to overturn an election, inciting an insurrection. Oh, and this court also essentially gutted the 14th Amendment when Colorado justices essentially said this guy can't be on the ballot because the 14th Amendment says he can't be on the ballot. They gutted it. The Supreme Court has basically played the role of protecting the guy who tried to overturn our constitutional order. Now, what kind of a court is that? Real clear. So what do we do about it? I'd like to have the whistle blown about it. The American people should understand this court is not doing good law. It is not deciding on good faith. It is owned by one of the parties, a political force, which, moreover, can be shown to consistently make the human world worse. People in the Biden circle, if I recall, were talking about characterizing this Supreme Court as extreme right wing. It's a lot worse than that. Extreme, well, what exactly does that mean? But you can imagine that somebody might have very, very conservative views of things that history shows are people like that, who nonetheless have integrity. And who, if they were sitting on the Supreme Court, could never sign something like this immunity decision. Because it is so obviously an abuse of their power that's supposed to be exercised to uphold the rule of law and is here being aligning with the interests of the criminal who refuses to allow himself to be held accountable by the rule of law. The guy who defied 2 impeachments. If anybody was ever going to be impeachable, this guy was impeachable, but he survived. The rule of law is really up against the ropes and has been up against the ropes in a lot of ways for a good while. And Biden's moves are okay. But we really need to join the battle more fully right now. By right now, I mean after the election, if we can win this election. Bring this up only in whatever ways help defeat Trump. Like the way Kamala has hung the Dobbs decision around Trump's neck because Trump has been proud of what he did. But winning the election is the first order of business. But once we win that election, if we can win it, the battle of democracy versus fascism has to take on the situation that we got, the emergency we have in the Supreme Court, where the worst of the American power system now basically is dictating from the highest court on the land about how our society is going to develop. A coherent force that consistently works to make things worse. This is part of what needs to be fought. Trump is part of it. The Supreme Court is part of it. They're natural allies because they're both expressions of the same fascistic force. We can't put off the battle. How to conduct it? Well, we should at least be asking, how can this be conducted? There must be some kind of confrontation going on at some level in the immediate time about what this court has become, so that the American people will withdraw their own respect for its authority. And it will cease to have the power it could use to allow fascism to dictate what America is going to be like a generation or two from now. Thanks.